Hello and welcome to my next video. This is going to be a Q&A, and it's taken me a bit longer to prepare than I thought it would because I have a very interesting question to get to grips with, and hopefully you can get to grips with as well. What I want to do is look at what makes a great prime minister. Maybe we've had some, I don't know. You might not think we have. The last few prime ministers have all struggled to a certain extent, and I don't want this to be a list, but we could go through a list of prime ministers, and we could start with Margaret Thatcher, and we could go through Tony Blair, and we could say maybe they had moments of greatness in terms of the way they led the country and they acted as prime minister. And we could look at prime ministers like Liz Truss and perhaps Theresa May who haven't been so successful. But I want it to be a bit more engaging than that. And what I want you to do is to think about the criteria that I set up for the prime ministers in terms of what is good about them and what is poor about them, what they need to do in the job to excel, and think about prime ministers that you've learnt about. You should do some case studies on prime ministers, and so this should help you clarify in your own mind what prime ministers have done that were good and what they've done perhaps which weren't so good or just terrible perhaps. So let's take a look at some. First of all, I want to take a look at some kind of common ideas that aren't too helpful. We could take a look at prime ministers who have won multiple elections and just say, well, they're the great prime ministers. Harold Wilson, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, these are the prime ministers that are great. Even David Cameron, we could say, well, yes, obviously they've won elections, multiple elections, therefore they're good. The reason that doesn't help is because winning elections and being prime minister looks like the two things are connected, but they're not. It's not an entrance exam. You don't win an election and prove that you're going to be a good prime minister. It's what you do with the office once you're there. So the fact that we've got people who have won multiple elections could be a factor to show that they are seen as good prime ministers by the public, but they didn't win an election in the first place because they were a good prime minister. It's kind of the other way around. So it's not necessarily a good guide to being great in the office. So it's an easy thing to look at, but I'm not sure it's that helpful. There has to be more to the role than that. And of course, to win an election, you have to be a great campaigner. You have to appeal to the public. Once you step into number 10 Downing Street, you've got a whole list of things which are very different from that. You've got to be a problem solver. You've got to lead. You've got to, we'll go through some of the things that you have to do. You've got to be a decision maker. And it's not the same as campaigning. There have been prime ministers who have treated it the same. Boris Johnson's a campaigner. And in some regards, he treated being prime minister as a campaign. Pretty much everything he did was done in that kind of way. It doesn't ultimately win through on everything that you have to do as prime minister. Something else I see an awful lot, and I say it myself, a particular prime minister is charismatic. There's a real problem with this word. No one ever defines it. No one ever says Tony Blair was charismatic and this is why. We can show what that means and how did that contribute to him being a great prime minister. Margaret Thatcher was charismatic. Big deal, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah, we do have occasionally a prime minister comes along who's charismatic. Not all of them are charismatic in the same way, and it's not clear that that is a basis for doing the job. Doesn't mean that charismatic is better than non-charismatic. So it's a tricky thing. Being popular, so again, that's linked to winning elections. Being someone that the public like, or even perhaps more importantly, we can't judge politicians on the basis of whether we agree with them or not. If we are studying politics and we've got something to say about politics, it's not about whether a politician does the things we want them to do. We have to be able to detach ourselves and judge them on some other criteria, something independent that we can judge them on, so that it's not, oh well, this politician created the NHS, so they were great. Okay, so let's think about what actually made them great. Is it because they did something we like, or is it because they had skills that enabled them to do things? We need to be more detached. Also, being great with the media is not necessarily the standard either. All politicians, in order to get on, have to have a relationship with the media. The reason I don't think it's too helpful these days is because it's changing so much. The media landscape is altering drastically. People like Nigel Farage are great with social media. Do I think he'd be a great prime minister? No, I don't. Think he's got the skill to be prime minister. There are, and again, there's a link to charismatic as well. And I kind of think, well, so what? You're great with the media. There needs to be more to it than that. Everybody in politics has to deal with the media. Some are better at it than others. Jeremy Corbyn, never prime minister, of course, so far, hated the media. Kemi Badenoch hates dealing with the mainstream media. She might be prime minister one day. So, you can be prime minister without being great with the media. You might not get very far. I don't know. Tony Blair was great with the media, Margaret Thatcher as well, but I don't think those were the skills that made them great. I think there's more to it than that. That's just part of the job, is having to deal with the media. So I'm not going to look at that. So let's take a look at the basics. And I want to point out here that I've done some research here by looking at Anthony Seldon's book, Truss at 10, How Not to be Prime Minister, which is brilliant. And I've also seen him doing a lecture on YouTube, which has been really helpful for me to get to grips with this. One of the reasons why it's taken me a bit longer to do this than I wanted. And the basics are these things. The basics for a prime minister are that they have to learn on the job. There is no preparation for the role. We could look to the other three great officers of state, the Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary, and the Home Secretary, and we could look at being leader of the opposition. They are all difficult jobs. They are all jobs where you have to make big decisions, and obviously leader of the opposition, you have to lead your party, so you're already learning part of the role of prime minister by doing that. But once you get into number 10, you're doing a job that is unique. There isn't anything else like it in the country, so you have to learn on the job. You have to learn how to be prime minister as you go along. And some people adapt quicker than others, and some people never quite get there, and it shows, frankly. Right now we are seeing, as I make this, we're seeing rumours that Keir Starmer could be replaced as Labour leader, and part of that comes down to the decisions he's making in office, the relationship he's got with his party, and the decisions of his government, and the popularity with the backbenchers and so on, and the public, of course. It suggests that learning on the job is not necessarily going swimmingly, I would argue. The next thing is you need to have the right team around you. So this means staff in number 10 that you want with you in your office, but it also means the cabinet as well. You need them there from the start, really. You could try to pick people up along as you go along, but you need the right team right away. When you start to chop and change, it looks like mistakes were made in the first instance. Let me give you another Keir Starmer example. His Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, put into office when he became Prime Minister, didn't survive very long in the job, excuse me. And then you get Morgan McSweeney in the role, and it turns out that he isn't necessarily liked by people on the backbenches. And, you know, with every change you make then, you are trying to get this team around you that perhaps should have been there in the first instance. They are going to help you through the bad times. When things go wrong, that right team is going to make sure that you get through those difficult moments. You have to stay on the bridge of the ship. You delegate things that you don't need to do, but steering the ship is your job. Again, I have a recent Keir Starmer example here where the things I've been reading about suggest that he is delegating an awful lot to Morgan McSweeney or to other cabinet members. And when there's a problem within the cabinet, perhaps a disagreement between cabinet members, he is not dealing with it himself. He's avoiding conflict. And obviously these are just kind of like rumors that are circulating in the press with the reading that I've done, but it suggests that he's not steering the ship, that he's not the final decision maker on an awful lot of things. And that's an odd thing, because the Prime Minister sets the standard. The Prime Minister is the top of the tree in Downing Street, or they should be. So that's a tricky thing. You need to be able to tell a story. The Prime Minister needs to be able to explain why it is them that should be there and what they aim to achieve. It's absolutely paramount. What is the big idea? What are you hoping to do? And it needs to be explained continuously. And everything that you do has to kind of fit into that story. And some prime ministers are better at this than others. Tony Blair was brilliant at it, I think, and Margaret Thatcher as well. I know that Tony Blair used to spend an awful lot of time practicing what to say for multiple types of question that might come his way. So he was able to answer them. He was able to fit everything into that narrative. I'll give you an example of that, actually. So he inherited a Labour Party that was committed to devolution for Scotland and Wales. It was just there as a policy. They were going to have it. And when he was working out what his policy would be on joining the European single currency, what became the euro, he decided that such a constitutional change, such as getting rid of the pound, would need a referendum. And then he thought, well, if I'm having a referendum for that, because that's a big constitutional change, how can I just go ahead with devolution without asking people first? So suddenly his policy switched from definitely we're just going to have a Scottish Parliament and a Welsh Assembly to offering the people of Scotland and Wales a referendum on those two things. And so that made it a bit more consistent in his mind. Constitutional changes like that would need a referendum. And we still kind of have that idea that big constitutional change requires that. But that was part of him telling a story about what would happen with constitutional change if it was massive issues. And obviously it meant changing his policy, but a minor change, really. And of course, those two things, the creation of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, did actually happen. We didn't join the euro. We never had a referendum on it. We had a referendum to leave instead several years later. So telling a story and explaining what you aim to achieve is incredibly important. Keir Starmer talks about national renewal a lot, but not really in a way that tells us what that means. What's the end point? What are we looking for? Where are we going? What are we attempting to do? Does all of those policies that he's got fit in within that narrative? To me, they don't, and I don't think they do with the public. I don't think they resonate through to help people understand why him and what he's achieving. Liz Truss did tell a story about what kind of things she wanted and what she wanted to aim to achieve. So just because you do that doesn't mean you're going to be successful. You have to have everything going in the right direction. And we'll come back to her story soon. You also need to trust others and resist being tribal. Party unity is important. And again, I have Keir Starmer as an example. He has been brutal and ruthless with the left wing of his party, expelling Jeremy Corbyn, trying to get rid of Diane Abbott, and failing, actually, getting rid of left-wing members of the cabinet at the slightest opportunity. Louise Haigh springs to mind as Transport Secretary after it emerged that she had had some kind of incident with the police, which incidentally Keir Starmer knew about when he appointed her, came out into the press, and it was before she was even elected, came out in the press, and he immediately basically forced her to resign. He is being tribal. And the rumours are it comes from his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, who is on the right of the party, and it's a mistake. It's a mistake. The Labour Party is an astonishing group of factions on the left of politics, and you have to try to keep them together, or else the public detect that there's a disunited party. Disunited parties tend not to do very well. So he's got a problem there. Tony Blair had problems with the left of the party. He didn't get rid of them. He got into Parliament at the same time as Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn was a thorn in his side when he was Prime Minister. He didn't expel Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn got into the leadership of the Labour Party and didn't make life terribly difficult for the right. He tried to keep things together. He didn't try to take total control. So there are problems there. It is tricky. So you have to try and bring as many people into the tent as possible, I would say. Okay, so these are the basics. Let's think about some more specific things. And this is going to be interesting because these things are based very much on the book Truss at 10, How Not to be Prime Minister. These are some of the things that Anthony Seldon points out that Truss did badly. And so it gives us an opportunity to talk about those. But it also gives us an independent way to consider prime ministers. And we can apply prime ministers to each of these 10 areas. It is better than looking at whether they've done things you liked, or whether they've been popular, or whether they've won elections, or whether they're good with the media. Okay, let's take a look at them. Loyal party and workable majority is number one. Well, you're not going to do well if your party isn't loyal and you don't have a workable majority. So Theresa May had real problems getting Brexit done. She decided her majority wasn't big enough at 16. I think she inherited the majority of 16 from David Cameron, and she decided she wanted a larger majority, so called an election in 2017 and then lost that majority, which made her life even harder. It also meant that her party was going to be less loyal towards her because they'd lost colleagues and they'd lost a workable majority. So you need those things to be able to get things done in Parliament. So that is tricky. Have a clear and realistic plan. Well, this is similar to the point about having a story. Truss had a clear plan. It wasn't realistic. She thought that it was realistic, and it wasn't. The markets reacted badly to it. The public reacted badly to it, and her plan was, I think, mistaken on the basis that she perhaps thought she was more popular than she was. She clearly thought that winning a leadership election in the Conservative Party was akin to winning a general election and having that power. Of course, there's links to loyal party here as well. The Conservative Party MPs in that leadership election really supported Rishi Sunak, but the members voted for Truss. So that made life difficult for her. But her plan was clear, it just wasn't realistic. Having a realistic plan is important. I would say David Cameron's Big Society is an interesting prospect. A clear plan, not realistic. It did not, actually, it wasn't a clear plan. I'm gonna trash the whole thing. It wasn't clear or realistic. It was the idea that as you take money away from public services, charities and other organisations would come along and fill the gap. And of course they didn't. And they hadn't really planned for them to do so. And there was no incentive for them to do so. And so basically you end up with public services being decimated and nothing taking up the slack. Very silly. Okay, you have to appoint the best cabinet. This is a tricky job because if you're Prime Minister, you have to appoint the cabinet from Parliament. So you've got, most of them will need to come from the House of Commons, but you can put people from the House of Lords into the cabinet as well. Rishi Sunak put David Cameron as Lord Cameron back into the cabinet as Foreign Secretary, of course. But you have to appoint the best cabinet, and it does depend on the size of your majority. If you've got 350 MPs, ultimately you're going to have around about 25 in the cabinet and other ministers as well. By the time you're finished, you're going to be appointing about 100 people, and you want to be having all of the best people in the best positions. I always get frustrated at cabinet reshuffles because they present this new team to refresh everything, and I just think, didn't you pick the best cabinet before? Why is this now suddenly a better cabinet? You've had to change it. I always find that quite bewildering. Some cabinet ministers will be better than others, but you need them around you. We have cabinet government. We don't have presidents. Cabinet has to agree with everything that the government is doing. They have to, where there are disagreements, they have to sort them out, or they have to leave. And so you want the best people around who can deal with some very challenging, difficult briefs in their department. Coming to power at a propitious, I can't say it, but anyway, favourable moment. is tricky because you can't necessarily come to power at a favourable moment. But if you do, you have to command that moment. Liz Truss became Prime Minister, and moments later, no, not moments later, a little while later, days, the Queen died. And she kind of disappeared into the mists of time at that moment. The Liz Truss I'm talking about. She wasn't there. We don't think of the Queen dying and remembering the impact that Liz Truss made on that event. When Diana, Princess of Wales, died, Tony Blair commanded the moment. He had just come to power months earlier, and he did press. He spoke to the press that Sunday morning outside his home, and I think I'm right in saying outside his home, and talked about it in a way that meant something to people. Very well done. Gordon Brown came to power, and there was a terrorist attack at Glasgow Airport, and he commanded that moment. It fell apart for him at other times, but he commanded that moment. So it can be done, but you have to learn quickly and command those moments when you get them. I thought that Keir Starmer did a pretty good job of handling the riots in the first few weeks of him becoming Prime Minister, the far-right riots at hotels and so on. It then started to kind of fall apart on other issues, but I thought he did a good job in dealing with those. We talked about learning how to be PM, so I'm not going to go through that again. Obviously, Liz Truss didn't have long to learn, and she didn't do it very well. Be credible and highly regarded abroad. So, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, they come to mind on that front. Keir Starmer spent a lot of time trying to deal with foreign policy issues, and I think has a pretty good image so far. Liz Truss, terrible. Asked in her leadership campaign for the Tory party whether she considered something about France, whether she considered President Macron to be an ally or an enemy. And she answered that terribly badly. And, we're neighbours. We're neighbours with France. And surely we want to have a good relationship with France. Silly. So she wasn't highly regarded abroad, or indeed credible. You have to be credible on foreign policy. Avoid major changes of policy. Basically, try not to do U-turns. As I record this yesterday, Kemi Badenoch in Prime Minister's Questions accused Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, therefore, of doing a U-turn on their U-turn to do with the budget that's coming up next week. That was a good little dig. And if you can criticize a prime minister for U-turns, then you are getting somewhere. Margaret Thatcher, when she was prime minister, mentioned U-turns, and I think it was a conference speech, party conference speech, where she said the lady's not for turning, to rapturous applause from the Tory faithful. Sometimes you can't avoid U-turns, but you have to try. It looks like you're not steering the ship, basically, if you're having to go back. Have an expert and loyal team in number 10. Well, this is important. Your backroom staff are going to be the people that are incredibly important on a day-to-day basis. You're going to see them more than you see your cabinet colleagues. You have to deal with multiple crises, possibly every day. And having worked in government, I always thought, even though I was at the Home Office, I was quite a long way from Downing Street, but I saw in the Home Office what it was like when the Home Office was under pressure. We used to get this thick bundle of newspaper reports every day, and you could just go through them looking for the bit that you were responsible for. But going through them, it's just basically the Home Office being criticised by every newspaper on everything that we were doing. And you get into that kind of bunker mentality that you're being attacked on everything. You need people who can keep their head in that situation. You need people who can be loyal to the Prime Minister and make sure that everything is going well. Excuse me. We know Dominic Cummings, as Boris Johnson's chief advisor, was not entirely loyal and has come out afterwards as wanting to get rid of Boris Johnson. He thought he was able to get rid of the Prime Minister because he didn't like what he was doing. And there's friction between people in Number 10 at the moment and whether they are supportive of cabinet colleagues or not. There's been briefing against Wes Streeting, the health secretary, coming from somewhere in Downing Street. So, you know, they might be loyal to the Prime Minister, but they're not necessarily loyal to the cabinet, and it's all very, very messy. You want everybody on the same page, really. Retain confidence of the economic community. A reference to Truss again, I think. You need to be credible economically to be a good Prime Minister, and you need to retain the confidence of the party. You are not just Prime Minister, you're the leader of a party. Wow, that's tough. And it's tough for both Tory and Labour. I'm tempted to say that tougher for Labour historically because of the wide-ranging nature and factions within the Labour Party, but the Conservative Party in recent years has had its problems with loyalty amongst the backbenchers and so on. But those are the 10 things that you need in order to perform well. Some have performed better than others. The fact that Margaret Thatcher lasted 10 years as Prime Minister kind of suggests that she was doing things well, a lot of this well. Largely, the party was loyal. She had workable majorities. She had clear and realistic plans. She didn't do everything like that either, like Truss tried to do. She waited until she had won the 1983 election, her second election victory, before she went as far down that new right path as she was planning to go in terms of things like privatization and attacking the trade unions. Yeah, so you can look at each of these things and think of various prime ministers. Get a case study going on a couple of prime ministers and see what you think. What can you find out about how they have gone about either being brilliant or not being brilliant? And remember, it's not about whether you agree with them or not. Try to judge them on these kind of independent criteria, and that will be the best way to determine whether they are good or not. Okay, so I haven't spoon-fed you that. You have to kind of make a judgment yourself on which prime ministers you think are good, but those are the sorts of criteria I would be looking for. Okay, well, with that out of the way, I will wish you some happy studying. All right, bye-bye for now.